Good morning. Today we have the escrow panel. And first I wanted to introduce our three outstanding escrow officers. And each one of them, they're going to have about 1 minute to give them, tell you about their bio. So first is Vanessa James from Viva Escrow.
Wow, 1 minute's a long time. My name's Vanessa James. I'm with Viva Escrow. We recently moved from San Marino to Monrovia, but we do everything through email most of the time, right? So that works out good for us. I've been in the escrow business for about 17 years, started way back with this lady here, Kitty, back at Central Escrow. I am currently with the President-elect with the Escrow Association of San Gabriel Valley and past president a couple years back. And I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Vanessa. And this is Kitty from MLS Escrow.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kitty. Thank you so much for inviting me to this most important event. It's good seeing you all, not the only, but many other gatherings. It is occasions such as this morning that we can spend time together so that we can share our thoughts and comments of what we commonly practice. Kitty, I've been servicing the local neighborhood for the past 28 years. Central Escrow, now I'm with Olympus Escrow, proudly licensed by Department of Business Oversight. We have full capacities to service all realtors in the states of California. Our company is located in the heart of Arcadia, so I hope we will learn something of importance this morning when we spend our time together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kitty. The last one is Alina Chu from Glen Oaks Escrow.
Good morning. My name is Alina Chu. I'm currently working at Glen Oaks Escrow. I've been in the industry for over 35 years, I suppose. It's a long time. I don't want to say that too loud. Just hoping you can hear that, but yes, it is what it is. So most of you know me when we started Golden Escrow. So back in the days, that's many years ago. I started. You remember? As a baby. I started when I was in college. That was my part-time job. And I've been doing escrow ever since, so I do love this escrow industry, so feel free to reach out to us anytime. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is for Alina. What is SB2 and how has it affected our escrow transactions?
Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you guys know about this SB2 bill. It stands for the Senate Bill 2, so that's what that abbreviation is for. It was passed by the Affordable Housing and Jobs Act, which means that for recording fees, there's an additional fee of $75 that is being added for each recording documents. Now, it is exempt if you are paying transfer tax. So if you have a transaction, a real estate transaction, then you put a cover page to it and the $75 is waived. But how it affects our current transaction and how we've been processing is that on a given transaction, I'm giving you for what we've been through recently. I had a transaction that had a lot of liens and judgments. Like it had 2 payoffs, private payoff, liens, judgments, and if those reconveyance documents were given to us to record at the close of escrow, there would not have been that $75 because you're paying a transfer tax in that transaction. But all these reconveyances, turns out that they were giving me the releases after the fact, after the close of escrow. So it's subsequent to the recordation of the document, which means that a $75 fee was attached to each of those releases. Now, certain documents also have 2 titles, like a substitution of trustee and full reconveyance. It's in essence 2 documents in one. So the $75 fee is times 2 per document. So by the time we ended up adding those fees, it turned out to be an additional $450 or close to $500 extra just for recording fee because those releases were going to be recorded after the fact, after the close of escrow. So you do have to bear in mind that we have to pay for a lot of extra fees. So when you're giving estimates and so forth, a lot of the reconveyances are given to us after the fact, and that $75 will apply to that transaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. This question's for Kitty. What document needs to be returned to escrow holder after open of escrow?
Sure, thank you for your question. It is a great and important hint that all realtor can help out a smooth closing of any escrow. To remind your principal to return the escrow package to escrow holder ASAP. At the earliest stage, only to unstable your transaction. Also, it would be a good chance to confirm your purchase price, allocations of costs, commissions, some taxation documentations which the homeowners may need some consultations, timeframes. I normally call myself a messenger. What I do is to carry out two principals' intention to ensure a smooth recording. And that's what I do for a living. Thank you.
Here's a question from Vanessa. Under what circumstances will a client receive a supplemental property tax bill, and how is the amount determined? Why do some get one bill and others two?
So we get this question a lot. Clients are not sure. They don't understand what a supplemental tax bill, and how come they get two bills sometimes. So anytime a property is sold or transferred to a new owner or new construction is completed, the county's going to reassess the taxes, the property. It's most likely going to change the home's assessed value, and that's the trigger. Okay. The bill shows the change in value from the time escrow closed to the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. So say for instance, say for instance your assessed value in the past was $350. Now you sold the property for $450. That's a $100,000 difference. So that's what's going to be taxed. That's what you're going to get a supplemental tax bill on. That difference is taxed by how many months are left in the fiscal year. So if we closed in, say September, then that's 9 months left. So that's like 0.75% of the year. So that 100,000 is times by 75, and that would be $75,000 times the 1% tax rate. So then you get $750 is your supplemental tax bill. So it's a little bit of calculation. If you want to understand it a little bit more, we can sit down and talk about it. But I'm not a tax advisor. And the reason you get one or two tax bills depends on, supplemental tax bills, is going to depend on when you close escrow. So if you close, say, between June 1st and December 31st, you're going to get one supplemental bill. That's for the new year, the new fiscal year. But if you close between January 1st and May 31st, you get two supplemental bills. Okay, because they're reassessing the new tax roll. So you're going to get two because they're in the middle of that reassessment period. Then actually, if you close December 31st, it's gonna go to the two bills because they do it on the next month after you close escrow. Okay, so how this affects your clients is they get a preliminary change of ownership form during the escrow period. Please have them complete it because that's what the county will use to assess the property tax. The first page has to do with exclusions, so that would be really helpful if it applies. Things like parent to child, there's an exclusion for that. If it's transferring from a trust to an individual, there's an exclusion for that. There are additional exemption forms that you may need to fill out as well, so make sure they fill it out and then return it in a timely manner. And then page 2 has to do with, they use that to determine the market value. If it's not completed, if it's turned in at close of escrow, yeah, you may only get a $20 penalty, but then the county will send a new form to be completed. And if the claims don't fill it out within 90 days, they can get a penalty of as little as $100 up to $5,000 if there's a homeowner's exemption, or up to $20,000 if there's no homeowner's exemption. So please encourage your clients to complete the PCOR, because it's really not escrow's duty, although we do help, but we want to make sure that they're completed in full.
Thank you, Vanessa. Here's a question for Alina. For the LLC, what do we need to bring to escrow?
Okay, when, recently there's a lot of properties being held under the LLC. So the first thing you need to do is you have to ask them for the operating agreement, because only the operating agreement will let you know who are the managers of the LLC. So who has the capacity to sign in behalf of the LLC. The same thing goes for like a family trust. If you own the property under a family trust, you have to provide a copy of the trust agreement, because in there it stipulates who can sign and who has the capacity to do that. Now, recently I had a transaction under the LLC, and the title company is giving us information that there's a new act out there, the Secrecy Act, which will require us to provide the social security number of the individuals. So whether it's owned by the LLC, the corporation or trust, all the parties involved, they do need to start submitting their social security number as well. So this is just additional information I wanted to pass on today, because that's something new that we haven't had to encounter in the past, but the individuals, they will have to be providing that. So you have to kind of prepare your customers and let them know that it will be a requirement moving forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alina. Here's the question for Kitty. What is allocation of cost?
Allocations of cost, something to do with money talks. Allocations of cost actually is not as complicated. It has all clearly stated on your purchase agreement who's supposed to pay for what. On our escrow, supplemental escrow instruction, the updated trend is not going to identify or making any clear indications of that portion. So your purchase agreement would reveal, and eventually anything would get into argument. We will go back to read our purchase agreement. Apparently it comes to a concern and hardship upon the opening of escrow. If that happens to be a condo, most of the homeowners association property management would require in a very high ratio a upfront fees to provide a concerning HOA document to fulfill buyers and buyers lending process. In most of the common practice, seller would be responsible for HOA document when buyers are paying for the lender's questionnaires. According to the government requirement code, lender will need to get a copy of the updated documentations provided by the property management or anyone who manage the homeowner's unit. In terms of updating code, some sellers may think they can simply provide one set of HOA document to buyers or their lender when they acquire subject property, but likely those would not be including those updating documentations, including minutes, budget, financial statements, etc. So in order not to delay your closing, seller needed to consent and prepare a upfront fees as a fulfillment so that your escrow agent can make contact with the property management immediately to get that process. Sometimes it may easily get a week or 10 days pass if we do not happen to have the HOA contact. when that's not being provided by the listing agent, and it will be easily burned another 2 days if it happens to be us who makes contact with the homeowners to obtain the homeowners association's phone number. So I believe that would be one part, not as big as a argument ratio, but it would be definitely affect closing procedures. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kitty. Here's the questions for Vanessa. Some escrows take a while to get out their initial escrow documents, which can delay the transaction, but I send them the new RPA as soon as the seller signed it. What does escrow need that can help the transaction run a bit quicker and smoother?
Okay, so when escrow first opens, when you ask us to open escrow, we're gonna take a look at that purchase agreement. And there's usually about 5 things in particular that could typically be missing. And we look at the address, we look at the names, that sort of thing. But I'm talking about things that could delay us getting those escrow instructions out. The first and main thing I look at is a confirmation of acceptance. The CAR counteroffer and the page 10 of the purchase agreement says, a binding agreement is created when a copy of the signed acceptance is personally received by buyers or buyer's authorized agent, whether or not confirmed in this document. Page 10 goes on to say, completion of this confirmation is not legally required in order to create a binding agreement. It is solely intended to evidence the date the confirmation of acceptance has occurred. So a lot of agents don't have it initialed or dated because it's not legally binding, it doesn't matter. But how is escrow supposed to know what the confirmation of date is? I'm not going to sign that page 10 of the escrow acknowledgement if I can't get that date in writing. We need that. I mean, that's the date that penalties could apply if we don't close by that date. It is what your contingencies are based on. If there is sometimes an early release of funds, we need that date. And we don't want anyone blaming escrow on day 31 when escrow is supposed to close and people are trying to figure out, well, what date when is that supposed to be? The other thing we look at is the initial deposit. It automatically, your system automatically defaults to electronic funds transfers, but more often than not, I get people trying to turn in a check. And the realtors sometimes are just like, it doesn't matter, it's okay. The buyer tells me, the realtor told me it was fine. And I have no problem with it, except does the seller know? Are they in agreement? What happens if they don't turn in that deposit within the 3 days, the check within 3 days? And then it takes another 5 to 7 days to clear. And by that time, the buyer could have changed their mind and want to walk away, and there was never any stake in it, and now it's wasted time for all parties. Or maybe there's problems that arise, and that check never cleared. So think about that the next time. If, check the box. If you're okay with the check, just check the box, and that'll protect you. One other thing is the signatory. Who are the parties in the transaction? If it's in a trust or an LLC or a corporation, who are the authorized signatories? Do you know? Or are you just having them sign because they say? Get a copy of the trust, get a copy of the corporate documents. And use that CAR form. There's a CAR form called Representative Capacity Signature Disclosure for buyer or for seller. That's theirs, has them state. So again, it helps you. It states who has authority and in what capacity. So please, I encourage you to use that. And then another item I look for is on page 10, the real estate broker section. Please complete your license numbers, your broker's license numbers and agent's license numbers. Fill it out. I had a couple of times already where the license, I noticed that number didn't match page 1 at the bottom, so I kind of did some investigating, and I always check. We always go to the business search and make sure that license number is active. But I checked on it and it didn't match. The agent didn't go with the brokerage, and I asked about that, and they're like, oh, well, we changed companies. Well, guess what? I have to pay the old brokerage, not the new one. She insisted that we pay her, and it's okay, and and her broker's okay with it. They weren't okay with it. Unless they sign over to the new company, I mean, I think they barely even knew that she was changing. So and she insisted up until the day, I'm like, okay, I can still go forward, but when we close escrow, I'm gonna have to pay the old one unless I get something from the old signing over to the new. And they never did it. It was a problem. So make sure that's right. And something Kitty had mentioned, allocation of cost. Going through the contract, sometimes TCs prepare it. It doesn't get looked over very closely and things could get missed. Make sure you're saying who's paying for what. There was one I got about a year, 2 years ago, where all cash transactions, supposed to be nice, quick, 10-day escrow, and the buyer's agent marked down, buyer pays for title policy. The buyer didn't want a title policy, they didn't have a loan. They were gonna have to pay for the owner's title policy, which was a couple $1,000s. They weren't expecting. It was a mistake. And luckily, the seller in the end agreed to pay for half. They didn't have to. That's not what the contract said. So they were pretty surprised with that. Just, go through it, make sure boxes are marked and you know, who's paying for what.
Thank you, Vanessa. Here's a question for Alina. At what point do we need to convert one escrow into two?
Okay, this is also based on recent past experiences. I had a purchase contract turn in to open a transaction. It was for a sale of a hotel, and it had business attached to it. But then the agents insisted over and over, no, we are only going to give you one contract for both, and we want one escrow for both. And that's not the right way. The right way would be you have to submit two different purchase contracts, one for the real estate and one for the business. Business is considered personal property and it has to be a separate entity. Now, the best way for you to resolve that issue is ask your sellers to provide a copy of the business license, because majority of the time, the business license will be under a different entity's name. They usually open it under a different business entity. So definitely, you have to convince the agents that you have to separate it into two different contracts, especially when you have two different entities. It's two different. So you have to reallocate the value of. You have to break down the value of it. How much is the real estate and how much is the business? And of course, there's always a big dispute. Oh, how much are they going to do the business? So the best way would be to advise them to talk to their CPA and see if their CPA can help them establish a value for the business portion, because obviously they're paying business sales tax on the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and that maybe might help you gauge how much the value of the business should be. Okay? And the bulk, right? Yeah. There's a lot of different items that are covering the business portion of the contract that if you follow just one contract and you give me a breakdown, you can do that, but it's not recommended. It will be best to separate it, because the business opportunity purchase contract covers a lot more items that you need to cover for to prepare a business escrow transaction. Okay, thank you.
What are the items that could delay the closing of escrow?
What are the items cannot be?
What are the items that could delay the closing of escrow?
So what cannot be delayed, right?
No, what
What
will
can be-
delay?
Oh, what will delay? Okay. Well, okay. Question was, what will delay the close of escrow? A lot of items. We're talking about people's business, intention, mentality. That could delay the closing. With due respect to our purchase agreement, not as many principles going by. As a matter of fact, when the trend is getting a lot of outsider, a lot of investor coming from the other side of the country, that they would be prefer to go by their way. What could actually be delayed if we wanted to shorten the phrase. The final executions from the sellers on all the closing documents could be part of the major procedure to delay the closing. On the buyer's end, money, of course, for sure, could be delayed. Money talks, the buyer needed to be wellly consent. So it would be the realtors taking the most important step to educate the buyer. Having a concept of depositing in terms of making your deposit into good funds to purchase real property in our state takes an important part. Personal checks sometimes would be accepted as earnest money deposit to open any transaction. Of course, it will be depends on your escrow company's clearance period and any clearance procedure. From time to time, personal check is not really up to today's trend because it would becomes as non-sufficient funds, and most of the title company would require a minimum of 7 to 11 business days to go through their clearance procedure, which is not a surprise. But please remember, each escrow companies are unique. We are going by, other than the DBO, the Departments of Business Oversight's regulations and guidelines, we do have our own internal companies' policies and protocol. Strictly towards the deposit, also disbursement. Alina just mentioned something about the capacities, authorities out of LLC on any commercial sales, book sale, etc. That would make a big affections out of all and any disbursements of escrow. That is what our concerns are. Our job is to make proper disbursement to any homeowners and sellers. So, example, I have challenged from time to time that the sole settler and trustee wanted to get paid out of their properties being vested under their family trust, living trust, although their trusts are revocable. We do believe, according to our company's protocol, everyone would have a reason to establish their real property under their trust. Apparently, not as many circumstances that a third-party closing agent would be able to see how many beneficiaries, how many trustees, silent beneficiaries would be hidden under one living and or family trust. So in terms of making a proper disbursement, I mean, who would want to deal with any afterwards haunting and nightmares? So we would need it to act together, to speak the same language, to let our homeowners consent according to their proper manner of vesting. The escrow disbursement would needed to make payable to how the title vested. This would be an important issue. We wanted to make sure the trust accounts would practically establish before we authorize the recording. Otherwise, the money would be get stuck and it would be breaching our withholding period without any proper instruction to withhold money in our account for an unforeseen period. So other than executions of closing documents, including grant deeds, if you're dealing with any seller who resides out of California, it's time cost. How many out of the country investor that we dealt with, that they needed to go through and U.S. embassies to make their grant deed and some legal documents notarized through U.S. embassy. That would be time consuming. Plus, we needed the original documentations to be returned. Original, fax, email would not be counted. So please add on those delivery method and time frames on any documentations needing to notarize out of state. On the buyer's end, money. I still seeing a lot of buyer, especially on some quick cash closing. They would prefer to make deposit 1 day prior to recording, which is absolutely out of our regular processing trend. We would need to work together, loan broker, escrow officers, real estate agent, to be responsive, to speak the same language. Let the investor and buyer knows money would not go anywhere, even though without a proper executions of the closing documents. So try to make a proper deposit into escrow holder's account, just to ensure your transaction will be closed as scheduled. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kitty. So one last question for Vanessa. In the past couple years, we've heard a lot about the CFPB. What are some of the latest changes and how can they impact our clients?
Okay, so the CFPB is a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That it's a U.S. government agency that's supposed to make sure banks and lenders and other financial companies treat you fairly. So this, there was a lot of talk in the past couple of years because things changed from using a till and a HUD one to the closing disclosure, right? We've all heard about that. And so there was recently, just this past last month, announcement made that they released a long-awaited final change to the TRID rules. The TRID rules to confirm that a revised closing disclosure can be used by a lender to reset tolerances. So what this was an amendment to the know before you owe rule. We had to, about a week before we close escrow, a closing disclosure goes out to the client. And then they have to wait a 3-day period before they sign loan docs. So what's happening though is once that closing disclosure goes out, we're not supposed to revise our fees. They're not supposed to go up. They're not supposed to change. But that was causing some issues, and so last year the CFPB put out asked for some input from the community to see what we can do about changing that, because it was causing some delays or problems, or causing the lenders to absorb some of the cost. And so even when there's legitimate reasons, like maybe there was a rate lock change, maybe the client asked for it, maybe there was weather issues, it's not just here in California, but it's throughout the country. So sometimes there was legitimate reasons to get those extensions, and they couldn't get them because the closing disclosure went out. So the lender had to absorb cost. And sometimes that meant that that they had to deny some loans because they were maybe a little bit more high risk. So what this amendment is going to do is it's going to allow the lenders to go ahead and make the change under certain circumstances, like rate lock, or like tax prorations or per diems, or certain tolerances are going to be okay. They have to prove it, they have to document it, there has to be legitimate reasons for it, but now the lenders are not going to have to necessarily absorb those costs, which could cause them ultimately to pass those costs on to the consumer. So it's a good thing for us in this industry. There are also a few other little changes. They actually are changing the name from CFPB to the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, and they are referring to it as the Bureau. With that change, they're going to be They just unveiled a new seal, where before, I don't know if you've seen it, it's like green letters, CFPB. Now they're gonna have an official seal. I don't have it here big enough to show you, but it's gonna look like it's a government agency, so they want a government seal. There's like an eagle and a shield to show protection, that sort of thing. There was a semi-annual report highlighting the Bureau's work with the acting director, pointed out 4 things that he wanted to change. It's like 60 pages long. And today and this week, the American Escrow Association is meeting for their annual conference in Kansas City, Missouri. That's where a lot of our escrow people are, where my boss is at, and they're being updated tomorrow by the attorney on this 60-page document and how it's going to affect us and change us. So, make the changes for us. So we'll be updated on that later this month.
Thank you, Vanessa. And then due to the time limit, we're gonna open up like a couple questions. So, anyone has any questions? No? Okay, we got one. Vince.
What if it's kind of a short sale and have an HOA liens on the property, and the lender doesn't have to want to pay for that HOA lien? How you could proceed in that area? You have an idea?
On a short sale, and it happens to be a condominium which HOA dues that are delinquent, there's usually a person who negotiates the short sale and the fees, and that person has to negotiate the HOA fees as well. It's part of their duties. When they submitted to approve the short sale on the first, they have to submit it for the second and the third, and the HOA fees. So all of that has to be done by that same person who's doing the negotiations.
I've done a few on those. It's been a little while, but they've the HOA has taken them off. They've reduced it. I've done tons of estimates where this is a real amount, going back and forth with the lender, but a lot of times the HOA kind of sucks it up or passes it on, but takes it off of the property. They don't, yeah.
Okay, let's open up
Plus
another.
your title rep can give you a big hands on whether or not they're willing to wipe out the HOA liens too, sometimes.
Is there any other questions?
I'm sorry, yes. Good morning, and thank you so very much for all your informative information. Now, how long do escrow companies keep the records? And then, just in case if they go out of business, where do you find that in the record?
We're required, I believe, for 5 years, and our documents are scanned electronically, and I think they're even kept for longer, but 5 years is the requirement, right? Right, Department of Business Oversight.
They do get destroyed. We do destroy the documents after 5 years, and the records too. They get eliminated.
Okay, as you know, like 20 years ago, there was no electronic or any computerized documents. Where do you find those documents?
Okay, we only keep them for 5 years. After 5 years, we're not required to keep any documents at that point. So if you talk about before we used to keep them manually in a storage, but we do shred them after 5 years. So everything has been destroyed. We only keep them for 5 years.
We have a very high tension on file timeframes. On the day upon 5 years, gone.
But I'm not sure what you're looking for, but of course, the ones that are most important are those reportable documents, which we can pull from the county.
Thank you so much. Please give a